Ross Melton, the chair of this committee. A few housekeeping points before we proceed. Please can I ask officers to introduce themselves when speaking for the first time? And would everyone please remember to use their microphones for minute purposes. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. By taking part, you are consenting to be recorded. There are tea, coffee and biscuits available on my right in the staff kitchen. There are also toilets in the main reception. You will require support of security staff if you haven't got a badge. If a fire alarm sounds either continuously or intermittently, I will adjourn the meeting. Please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion, and the staff fire exit, which is behind me on my right. Officers will direct you to the assembly point on Riverside Gardens. Final housekeeping point is to give a very warm welcome to Sam as our newly appointed independent advisor. Very much look forward to his contributions to this and our future meetings. Let's proceed with the agenda. A quick note for members is that we are slightly reordering the agenda for this evening. At Eleanor's request, we are shifting item 5 to after item 7, if that's correct. Perfect. Item 1 then, can I ask for apologies for absences? I note that Peter is not in his place, so if he's unable to join us, we will note him. Item 2, can I ask members if they have any declarations of interest for the items to be discussed this evening? Marvellous. Item 3, minutes from our previous meeting. Can I ask if members approve both the open and exempt minutes?
Approved.
One more. Thank you very much. Excellent. Then let's press on. Eleanor, if we can start with you on item 4 with General Code of Practice Compliance Review.
Good evening, Eleanor Dennis, Head of Pensions. So as a result of the pension regulator issuing the General Code of Practice for pension schemes in March 2024, I have asked consultants Barnett Waddingham to provide an independent review of the fund's compliance to the code, and will now pass over to Gavin Paul to present his findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. I'll just put the slides up on screen. Okay, yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you about the General Code. So excuse me, I just want to move the share slide along. That's it. Just a bit of regulatory information to start with. That's just about, we're not here to provide investment advice, etc. So what I'm going to talk about is, first of all, I just thought it'd be useful, we will talk about the results. We've done a review of all the documents and policies for this particular fund. But I thought it might be worthwhile to do a bit of background to the code so you know why I'm here in the first place, and talk about the regulator as well, because that's something that's probably quite new to this particular sector. So background to the General Code. So first of all, the pensions regulator. So the regulator, hasn't had much of an impact on public sector schemes yet. It came into it started to take an active role from 1st of April 2015 when the Public Service Pensions Act came into force. But it's been around for quite some time, but it's mainly there for the private sector, particularly the defined benefit sector, when it was set up in 2005. And over time, it's got a number of objectives. It started with 3, but over time that's been extended, and that's those objectives are set out on the right-hand side. Now, the thing to remember is the regulator is not just looking after the LGPS or public sector schemes, it's every scheme in the UK. So that's the smallest defined contribution scheme to the biggest defined benefit scheme. So it covers a huge range of schemes. So those objectives have changed over time as the industry's changed, as the environment's changed. It used to be, particularly the private sector, where it was concerned about schemes falling into the pension protection fund, but it's really there to protect the benefits of members of occupational schemes and personal schemes. And as I said, it took a while to come to the public sector. It has significant enforcement powers, but those don't really apply in the public sector. They tend to apply to the private sector defined benefit schemes. But what it is required is to provide an issue codes of practice for certain items, as well as other ones voluntarily, including the General Code of Practice, which I'll talk about in a moment. And what does a code do? Well, remember, the code is not, don't enforce the terms of a code itself. It's sets down practical guidance and standards for people to follow. But within that, it will base certain standards around legislative requirements. And you'd always go back to the legislation if you need to enforce anything. So that's the background, that's the regulator who now plays a role with the LGPS. The codes are new to the LGPS, because if you remember, back in 1st of April 2015, there was a public sector code of practice, a nice, relatively succinct one, Code 14, and it covers all the matters set out down the right-hand side, which again, as you'll see, when I come onto the general code, you'll see those are repeated. So it shouldn't be new to the public sector, but the new code of practice is about 3 times the size of this, because it covers all types of schemes. That's the issue. So moving on to the general code of practice itself, it became effective from the 28th of March last year, so almost at its anniversary. And what it did, there were lots of codes out there, were 16 codes out there, and it combined 10 of them into one all-encompassing general code of practice, which includes the public sector code. 6 remain outside, but you don't need to worry about those. Those are private sector focused. It's split into modules, and I'll show you the modules in a moment. And it's web-based. The idea being it's easily accessible, and in the event that it needs to be changed, it's easier to change it in future. There will be certain requirements that need to be followed, but having it web-based means it's a lot easier for it to be changed in future. It's aimed at governing bodies. I think this is important. So it can be the administrative authority, that can be, but also there are certain requirements that focus on the local pensions board. And those are set out within the code of practice itself. But what I will say is not all modules apply to the public sector. The problem being, of course, that you're trying to apply a 171-page document across the board, so not all will apply to the public sector, and that includes the LGPS. And unfortunately, it did promise it at one stage, but it didn't set out which bits apply to the LGPS and which bits don't. So part of this exercise has been to let Eleanor and the officers know which ones apply and which ones don't. So this is what it's split into. Lots of different, there's 5 main modules across the top. And then within that, you have lots of different we call them sub-modules. And within actually the ones I've listed there are more. So when we've done the analysis, we've looked at 53 different sub-modules, just to warn you. And we've gone through each of those, and I'll show you how we've done it in a moment. Not all these apply. So funding and investment, for example, that's not directly applicable to the LGPS. So even though that comprises quite a big section of it, it's not directly applicable. And however, you'll be surprised that because the LGPS is a well run and quite a regulated area, you actually apply to most of those you already cover. You cover anyway with your existing policies. So there are a lot of areas where automatically you'll comply with them. And I just thought I'd give you an example with the code of practice. And think about the code. Sometimes it's worth thinking of this. If the highway code is probably the most common highway code, I think we'd all know about, and it works in the same way. Oh, excuse me. And you have lots of different it's full of expectations of the regulator, but it defines these differently. So when you see a must on the left-hand side, you see a must obligation, that refers back to a legislative requirement. So that's where that comes from. So you'll probably be already complying with that anyway as a result of the legislation, not as a result of the code. You also have, but at the same time, what the regulator is, it sort of nudges you, even ones that maybe don't quite apply to you, it suggests that perhaps you should comply with them. It would be best practice to do so, though. So there are a number of obligations which use the word should. So things like identifying risks. You should identify risks, record them, regularly review. Not necessarily, it's not a must requirement, but it's a should requirement. So the expectation is that you would probably comply with that, or you'd want to. And then there's a lot of these under the risk management section, under scheme continuity planning on the end. Good practice, the code says, and this is classic wording within it, scheme managers of public service schemes, that includes the LGPS, do not have the same obligations in pension legislation. This is therefore not part of expectations on them, but it is good practice for them to consider carrying out continuity planning in the same way. So it's like a clear nudge that we'd like you to think about doing it. So the code is full of phrases like that, and you have to understand which ones apply, which ones don't, and which ones it would be good for you to actually follow. There's 171 pages of these, by the way, so there's a lot to read. So what about the enforcement of the regulator? What if you don't comply with it? Well, the regulator doesn't have any new powers to enforce the code. It has to rely on the ones it's already got. So primarily those will be compliance notices. We want you to comply. We've seen this, we want you to comply. Or improvement notice. Yes, we've seen you've made an effort to comply, but we want you to improve on it. But the regulator doesn't tend to work like that. It tends to engage with you, first of all, if there's an issue, and persuade you to do it that way before taking any action such as this. And it can be used in the court of tribunal, a bit like a highway code, for example, where if you breach the highway code, it might not be a matter that leads to a criminal investigation, for example, but if you cause an accident because of it, that's where it comes in. It's a bit like that here. So let's focus on Hammersmith and Fulham. The process we were asked to, the way we did this, we did a reverse gap analysis. And what we mean by that is we did all the digging. So we did a desktop review of all the online documents, policies that we could find. And if we couldn't find them, because don't forget, some of them you don't want published. Maybe if there's a cyber policy, that sort of thing, those aren't published publicly. So we're going to get in touch with the officers such as Eleanor to help us out with those. And then what we produce is a table. Well, what I do first of all is give you a summary of what we have found. So the 53 modules, this is a chart of what we have found. And the good news is the fund is very strong in terms of its compliance with the general code. So, and the thing to focus on is 75%. The fund meets 75% of their expectations under the code. So that's a really good solid start. And remembering that a lot of these don't apply at all to the LDPS, you had 19% of that, we're only left with 6%. So there's only a very small fraction that either they're awaiting assessment or we've identified a couple of areas where you're moving towards compliance, but perhaps not quite there yet. It's rated, what we've done, we've rated it green, amber, and red. Red, you haven't complied with it, there aren't any red ratings. Amber, where you're partially there, and green where you do comply. So that's how we've done it. But the good news is there's no red ratings. So rather than going, the report itself is about 40 odd pages long. If we went through that, we'd be here all night. So I don't want to go through that, but what I thought would be helpful to do is just pull out a few extracts from our report so you can see how we've done it. So this is the layout. You can see the headings across the top. So what we've done, we've tried to design it for officers. So, and if the regulator does come knocking, you can throw it at them and say, there you go, and this is where we found the evidence for compliance. So it's setting out drawing the expectations from the code, ascertain whether it applies or not and how it applies to the LDPS, the status of the fund, which policies match that. So it's always there, it's a good reference point. And then what we've also done as well, we've just included an extra column because, as you know, there's a consultation going on, the Fit for the Future consultation, and I think it might impact on in future, and depending on what comes out of the review, it might impact on, or the report might need to be updated to cover some of the new requirements. So this one, knowledge and understanding, you comply with it because you have a good training, good record of training for committee members and board members, and that's kept within the annual report and accounts. So there's very solid compliance there. This one I thought I'd bring out the risk register, and the reason I've done this is under that application to the LPGPS, the second column along, this is a must. This is all about establishing internal controls. So this is a must requirement. The good thing is you've got a very strong risk register and risk management policy here. That's an example of that one. And then this one, investment governance. Do you remember, investment doesn't directly apply to the LDPS, but I thought just nice to draw out here that without you doing anything, you comply with it. Because again, the investment is strongly governed, I think generally within the LGPS and this fund as well. So just thought it'd be helpful just to draw that out as well. And then finally on as I said, there's about 40 pages of this, but This is just one area to finish with where we suggested perhaps a little bit more work needs to be done. So this is to do with data monitoring and improvement. So there are evidence that presentations are given to the committee, the administrators inform you around data and quality of data. But we would recommend that the fund puts in place a data monitoring and improvement strategy. And that is just, how you monitor how data is improved over time and the processes you use. There's nothing serious there. That's the thing to think. And don't rush to comply here. Make sure what you're doing is good for the fund. That's the important thing here. Because we have seen other ones where they get in a panic when they see an amber or a red. But I think the important thing is to take your time and get the right process in place. Just moving on, just a quick summary. So the fund's in a strong position overall, and it also complies with most of those good practice modules. So the ones that don't directly apply, but they suggest it'd be good practice to do so. And again, most of the work that is needed will be under the amber modules, but you've only got a couple of those within it, so you're in a good position. And I just thought, finally, just looking ahead, just to finish up, it's a great opportunity, I think, now to take a step back and think how you are, how the fund is in terms of the position it's in, with the terms of its processes. It's like a reset point. But compliance needs to be ongoing. Don't just put this in a drawer and forget about it. It needs to be ongoing. And if anything does happen, anything new comes in with a fit for the future consultation, we'll be in touch with Eleanor, to tell her what we think needs to be done. And of course, the code may change over time. Hasn't yet in the first year, but it may change over time. So I would say, just in summary, the fund's in a good position. We've worked closely with Eleanor to help out. And I think the next item on the agenda is partly to do with this as well. But as I said, it's one thing that needs to keep monitoring and keep working on as things change in time and in the future. So it's just a short summary. I said I could have taken a couple of hours to do that for you, but I think maybe that's too much. But I'm delighted to take questions if there are any.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Gavin, and blessing us with your concise summary. Any questions from committee members? Please, Adam Peter.
Thank you very much, Gavin. That was very clear, actually, and I'm pleased that you went through it so well. Just on the amber warnings, I'm just trying to find the thing you gave. It's only 4%, but that's still 4%. So obviously we want to make sure that we were doing that. And I noticed in the last one you gave us something that we're supposed to do. Recommend the fund puts in place a data monitoring and improvement strategy. Just very quickly, because I'm not au fait with all of this, who would do that? Who would put in place that? This board or this committee, or would it be officers?
I'd expect it to be officers would do it.
No, and then
they're not going to.
Right, and then so officers are looking at the bits, the gaps that we've got, and would work on that, and then bring that back to this committee. Is that the way we would proceed?
That's how it is.
That's what you recommend. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think members of all colours will agree we don't normally like to see green succeed. However, I wanted to quote page 18 of your report, which is the executive summary stating there are 40 green indicators, only 2 ambers, and in fact, no red. That's something to be celebrated. I think it shows the consistency and the quality of the people who work to ensure that we are compliant around the clock and not just when the auditors turn up. So first of all, to all the people who work around the clock and all year, thank you. I was interested in some of the things you say in the report, which are focused around an inability to find some documentation. So I appreciate that you rightly have said sometimes we do not want to put it all out there in the public domain for criminals or bad actors to then use. But I wondered if you could tell us whether there were, for instance, on page 31, you say we were unable to locate any specific documents specifically for internal audit reports. Page 52, pension scam strategy, you say we were unable to locate documentation on internal controls. Could you tell us more as to not necessarily each and every individual case, but is it more a general feeling from you that these documents exist, but they're not there in the public domain, or that they don't exist and they should?
No, that's what your first assumption is, right? They do exist, but they're not in the public domain because there are certain things you would not are not suitable for being in the public domain. And I think I've got the feeling the scams might have been one. I thought it might have been an amber. So, for example, that's one where we do think there's a bit of work to be done, but I think from memory, that work is being done on that point at the moment. But there are certain things, yes, we wouldn't expect to see in the public domain for good reasons, but they do exist.
Through the chair, of course, but I wondered if officers want to tell more about the pension scam strategy. Fraud, of course, being now the first crime in England and Wales.
Thank you, Councillor. So in terms of the scam strategy, so obviously we contract out our administration to LPPA. They have a strict, that they're compliant with the regulator in terms of issuing scam notices and the checks that do, particular, for example, with transfer out, they have a RAG rating that the regulators put in place for transfers out, and they apply that, and any that are either predominantly amber or red flags, they will refer to myself to make a decision on. So we have a process that exists, and I think what Gavin's saying is we can perhaps scope that out a bit more to define more of a policy, but we're certainly doing all of the precautions. We just need to scope that out and make it more explicit in terms of a policy.
No.
And if I may, Chair, just on the internal audit point, so we work closely with LPPA's internal auditors who have an internal audit work programme. They provide us with the results of the work they do. What we're going to be bringing to the committee in June is our internal audit work programme, which will complement that, which is done by LPPA, and that will sit alongside the risk register that Eleanor has developed for the administration function. So again, you'll get to see some more of that in the next meeting as well.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say again, these are excellent responses and excellent work. I look forward to going to the audit committee to see that. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Really clear. Thanks very much. Just a quick question on the one item that you weren't able to assess. Is that, just to clarify, is that it can't be assessed, or there wasn't time to assess it and it's going to be done in future, or just what's the situation there?
Yeah, it's nothing sinister at all, that one. It's simply as we're not going to assess it, partly because one of them is some of their modules are set out so it all follows beneath it. So it's a general, if you like, there's a general introduction module, if you like, but all the specifics are below. So it's all covered in those. So that's why it looks perhaps a little bit misleading in terms of how we put that, but there's nothing sinister there to worry about.
Chair, the page 15 provides for various obligations for understanding and knowledge by pension board members. Does the council have any, or the officers have any plans for providing such training and in due course?
Thank you, Councillor. So the Treasury and Investment colleagues provide training twice a year. And in addition to that, I do circulate any relevant conferences or courses to both board and committee.
Perhaps as an action, as chair of the Pensions Audit Committee, Pensions Board, we can ensure that there's invitations to those trainings are also extended towards the board concurrently as the ones for the committee.
Thank you, Chair.
Lovely. If there's nothing further, to reiterate our thanks to the team at Barnet Waddingham, and to reiterate our thanks to team members for their fantastic work in ensuring that so much of this assessment is positive and green. Can I ask members to note the report?
Noted.
Marvellous. Pressing on, am I correct, Eleanor, that we are pressing on to item 6? Excellent. To key performance indicators.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper sets out the key performance indicators for our pension administrators LPPA for the period September to December 24 quarter 3 and the processing of the pension administration cases. So less cases were processed, coupled with KPIs being maintained above target in all case types. The highlights being retirements at 98.6% and death cases at 96%. Being processed on time. Although we have been notified that the bereavement team are receiving a large number of cases that may impact on future SLAs, so we do need to keep an eye on that. The LBHF pension team continue to intervene in cases handled by LPP across all case types, in particular retirements, refunds, transfers, and weekly pension payment information that is still on occasion incomplete. So we continue to manage that. I open the floor to any questions.
Thank you, Eleanor. It's really positive that LPPA are giving us this advance notice and forecasting of where they expect a spike in their work. Can you give us a bit of an insight on why they're forecasting an increase in bereavement and any preparatory actions that they're putting in place to manage that increased workload?
Thank you, Chair. I have asked the question and I'm awaiting a response as to the impact of that. So exactly that, understanding why they're communicating to us. Are they communicating to us because they're going to have relaxed SLAs, they're going to lengthen the SLAs, what the impact of that is going to be, how my team can support. So I have asked the question and we'll share the response with the committee.
Any further questions or observations? This is item 6, KPIs.
Yes.
Please, Florian.
Thank you. SLA targets above 100%. Targets above 100%. 100% of targets above SLA levels. I'm going to get there for all cases types in quarter 3. I promise I'm going to stop congratulating you and singing your praises. I think that's a major milestone that we need to note in this committee. This is the first time in my memory since we switched that we've hit all targets. So thank you on behalf of the many members, representative of the unions on here present tonight, but I'm sure that they would say that. So thank you for all of your work and please convey that to your team on behalf of the committee. I think I speak for all members. I also wanted to note the satisfaction rates actually have stayed good. Also, they fluctuate a little bit, but more people seem to be taking part in those. For active retirements, that has increased. For deferred, slightly decreased, but overall, there's an increase. You kindly, this isn't part of the pack tonight, but you kindly shared with us examples of where your team steps in to support LPPA. So that still happens. So that's something that we should take into account. Yes, 100% of the SLAs, but I wanted to speak more in detail about the 13 that you've noted in your email to us. Are they unusual cases? Were they cases where you felt it would be normal for you and your team to step in? And how did that number in quarter 3 2024 compare to other quarters, or possibly what you're experiencing this quarter?
Thank you, Councillor. So it's about average. It fluctuates between case types. So we've had probably more intervention with transfers than we would normally have, but less intervention in retirements, albeit that we are still intervening with retirement. So it fluctuates between case types. As I said in my email, that those 13 cases is not reflective of the amount of time that the team have chased or the amount of time that they spent interacting with LPPA. So we don't record that simply because we're a very small team and we focus on being as efficient as possible. But I'll continue to feed that back. I can see that you found that useful, and it does work in terms of collating that to enable LPPA to improve and to understand their client's response, because not all clients give them that feedback. So it's something we'll continue to do. But I can't determine whether that's, I'd say, as I said, it's about average, neither more or less than in previous cases. But obviously going forward, you'll be able to see why is that jumped and why is that solely on retirements and deaths, for example. So how that trend continues.
That's good. Thank you. I just want to be sure that we're able to say tonight that we've now hit a level which is finally a normal level of operations in general, where you feel that your team aren't being asked to do work that you wouldn't normally do, and the fact we've hit the targets isn't still because you're doing work in the background.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's a fair point. It's not normal. Some of the cases are bread and butter that they should know and shouldn't need our intervention. We should be focusing on other pieces of work. So meeting the KPIs, that's great. That's a tick. That should be consistent and is normal. The amount of interventions and the level of interventions is not normal, and they are a level that I would expect a large administrator like LPPA to be able to deliver on without my team's or myself's intervention.
Good. Well, look, Rome wasn't built in a day. You have taken us to a level. I know you've worked very hard with LPPA to make sure that they delivered on their contract with us. So I fully trust in you to be able to work on this. It's something that I will continue to ask you about, because this isn't about scrutinizing you, really. It's about making sure that you're able to do the work, which was my point since the beginning of my scrutiny of this element, that you're able to do the work that you should be doing, that you're contracted for as an individual, and not have to do that on top. So it's about fairness to your team, but also making sure that we're getting the right amount of, we're getting value for money from this contract. So I appreciate, again, your work. Well done on this milestone, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you, Councillor. Much appreciated.
Well, and of course, pleasingly, we will have LPPA in front of us at our next meeting, where we have an opportunity to both congratulate them on their performance and ask for their reassurance that they have actions in place to minimise the necessity of interventions from Eleanor and her team. Any further questions, observations? Please, Mike.
Just connected, I think, with the last point. Can you just remind us about the structure of the contract? Is it a rolling contract or a fixed term contract? So to the extent, with the benefit of hindsight, you might want to tweak some of the SLAs. Maybe we even want to consider paying more if that means that we will get a better service, or pay less in certain areas. I don't know. Is there like a review coming up where we can take stock?
Thank you, Mr. Adam. It's a rolling contract, but if I can touch on the budgeting side in the next paper, please.
Can I ask members to note the contents of the report?
Noted.
Thank you very much. Then let's press on then to item 7. Eleanor, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper sets out a summary of the key activities in the pension operations arena. Q3 had seen some clear positives. So in addition to the above target KPIs in all case types, it also saw the lowest level of complaints that we've had. So we had just one outstanding complaint at the end of December 24. Help desk calls in Q3 saw an average wait time of 2 minutes 3 seconds, coupled with continued good employer engagement with the monthly file submissions. Something to note in line with Mr. Adams' question is the budget is 1% above target for Q3, but will come back into line for the end of Q4. And going forward for 25-26, we will see an increase in the budget. That will be presented in May's paper when LPPA are here to field questions about that increase in the budget. On a less positive note, there was also a data breach in Q3, which saw data shared for 75 members of our fund with the incorrect payroll provider. That was reported to the ICO. and noting the further pension dates, meeting dates, the May meeting will allow the PFC to probe further. The ICO, just to note, said that no further action was required, so no notification to the affected members or the employers. I now welcome any questions.
Excuse me, can I just come back? I understand that the budget will amend, but I think the real point, or the more important point in this respect, is around the SLAs. So if it is a rolling contract, you know, to what extent or when do we get the opportunity to say, well, actually, you've been with us now for a couple of years, so we would expect your performance to be better, and we reset the SLA? Or we might say, if we have to choose where we put our resources, this one isn't quite as important, and we'd rather shift a bit of resource into another area. Or it could be that we want to measure a new SLA that it has become important to us. So, you know, how does the contract monitoring work in that respect?
Thank you, Mr. Adams. So in terms of the contract management, that's in terms of these quarterly reports that outline the SLA versus that was the percentage that was achieved, number of cases received, processed and achieved against those SLAs. I think we're in very dangerous water when we start dictating to the provider what the SLA should be when the service is actually at a reasonably good level. And when we tip that apple cart, then we need to be careful about what we're hoping to achieve by that. And they would be rather reluctant to change it just for one client. That would have to be across the board. It is a partnership arrangement. So those SLAs exist for all of their clients at the same level. They did change the SLAs for their new clients when we onboarded with them, and they put out relaxed SLAs. They are onboarding a new client, I believe, later this year, and that only that client is going to have relaxed SLAs. The rest of their clients will have the maintained SLAs as agreed. So I would question why we would want to change the SLAs when we don't see a significant issue with the service that's provided, other than improving quality and transparency in issues like data breaches.
Well, if you're happy with it, that I suppose answers a question. I suppose what I was driving at was whether, with the benefit of experience, there were areas where you thought the SLAs did not necessarily monitor the things that you were most interested in, or could be reset at a different level. It's interesting that other clients have the same SLAs, the same levels. Can you tell us how you work together as a group so that LPPA don't divide and rule when it comes to client feedback?
So, Mr. Adam, I separately as an individual maintain relationships with other clients. They don't encourage a forum other than an annual client forum to share their overall performance, but they don't encourage any quarterly meetings or anything with their clients. That's very much their prerogative and their directive. In terms of what the KPIs capture, you're right in terms of they don't capture the quality piece. I think now that we're on that service level, we may want to have discussions in the May meeting about how better they can demonstrate their quality performance and how they're going to improve that, because we know that it's not at a satisfactory level across the board.
Just to add to what Ellen has said, Mr. Adam, if that's okay, Chair. So obviously we entered into this public partnership rather than a commercial arrangement a few years back now. The SLAs we have with LPPA are actually shorter timescales than we had with our previous provider, so they're better. I think you're right, though, we should be challenging, as you have been doing already, with LPPA in terms of their performance when they come here. Each fund pays the same price per member for the same SLAs. So there's a conversation with them about, are the SLAs right? So I think it's right, but actually we just need to work with and recognise that the SLAs are the same across all the client base and all the clients pay the same cost per member. I thought it'd just be helpful to add that as well. Yeah.
As I think we've discussed before, I think it is a real asset that you maintain those relationships with other LPPA customers or partners, sorry, David, and that we found it really, really useful when you attend those annual reform meetings. So I look forward to hearing at the 2025 one. Laura.
Thank you very much. My recollection from when we first started working with them was that they attended an early meeting with us when they were really not doing very well, and they talked about amending their SLAs to be more realistic. And I understand they did that, and subsequently their performance has improved. And I suppose my question, it seems to me, going back to your point, that they seem to almost have a unilateral ability to amend their SLAs. And so my question to you, and I think we have to defer to it at a certain extent to your judgment. I'm happy to do that. But I suppose, are you yourself happy, and how do you, or what support do you get in terms of actually scrutinising changes to the SLAs, and whether or not that stepping back and having a big picture look, whether or not you're overall happy with what we're measuring?
Thank you, Councillor. I think the content, that there could be more transparent visibility of, and we had this when they weren't performing well, you're right, in terms of the additional reporting, in terms of those cases that missed the SLA, by how much did they miss the SLA. So originally they were reporting, we had X number over 10 days, but they didn't go any further than that. And then we had the further detail. Well, actually, the realities of those X number that didn't meet the SLA of 10 days, that SLA, most of them were at 30 days. Well, that's a very different picture that it was painting there. I think the issue with quality is very much about identifying what those issues are and how best to measure those. Now, they have tried in terms of additional reporting on the customer satisfaction piece there. So yes, all right, they produce most of the cases on time, but is the member experience better? And actually there's some work to do on that member experience, but so they're starting to report on that. That gives us visibility of how the member's journey is. So that's a step in the right direction there. I think that there's more work to do, certainly in that piece. Certainly, I think in death cases, for example, they are predominantly very messy. There is, without question, 90% of cases need intervention from myself or my team in those cases. I'm not yet sure how we demonstrate that. I think I have spoken to John before about the touch points. How many times do we touch that case? So that's something that we could potentially look at reporting on. But it's a work in progress. It's open discussions. Most of those discussions have started. We're not at the stage where we can demonstrate to you what that looks like, but it is an ongoing dialogue. So we're not just resting on our laurels and saying, here's the KPIs, we're meeting those. What we are digging deeper, but it will take time to give you that visibility.
Thank you, that's very helpful. I think what would be helpful for us in our role as a scrutiny committee, and also supporting your role in supporting members, is perhaps to have a short list of, you've given some examples there, a short list of some of your concerns before the main meeting, so we can actually use that meeting to probe, and you're welcome to put them on notice as well, in my view, so that we can have a proper dialogue and they can be held accountable for some of those things that are not currently in the SLAs, but are of concern.
Yeah, happy to do that. Thank you, Councillor.
If I may just add, Chair, to what Eleanor said, and that's very helpful, Councillor James, as well. I think I would observe that the report also contains information about complaints, which are reduced, about customer satisfaction, which is up and down in places, and actually the numbers of calls LPPA are dealing with, which suggests that quality is moving in the right direction. So when call numbers are going to be rising and there's lots of long times to answer calls, that suggests there's a problem, more of a problem. Those sort of indicators help, hopefully, to give some assurance that the quality is heading in the right direction.
Just give me a moment. Eleanor, did I understand your side there correctly, that of the 14 cases that you and your team supported LPPA on, intervened, that the majority of those were bereavement cases?
No, Chair, they weren't. There were 13 cases. They were only probably about 3 bereavement cases. But I'm saying of the bereavement cases, 90% we have to do intervention of some sort.
Excellent. So again, I think Councillor Chabot-Verdier's point is well made, that the more we're able to monitor and analyse that, I think it will enable more quality scrutiny when we have LPPA in front of us. Florian.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to talk about the breach. So there is, most KPIs seem to be progressing in the right direction. There is one which isn't so much KPI that is progressing in the wrong direction, which is my trust levels of LPPAs. Members will recollect that there was an incident previously in which this was slightly in the exempt agenda, so I'm going to choose my words very carefully here. A supplier of technology which had been involved in a breach that in fact wasn't disclosed to us at all. And this was an activity that was regulated, I believe. This was something to do with new regulation coming in, and that supplier had been chosen to supply that. Here we find ourselves in a situation where our PPA had a duty to disclose this data breach within 72 hours. They in fact took 7 days, which is 4 days more than they should have. And whilst I appreciate, and you've been good to reassure us on this, that there was in fact no critical data breach, there was only minor information, and that's reassuring to hear. Nonetheless, to have sent an email 2 months after, whereas the statutory duty is 1 month maximum, doesn't reassure me. It's the second time, obviously, I look forward to meeting the LPPA, and I will raise this with them. I'm very concerned about you also, I think your words were, it was a very vague email which suggests that they weren't taking this seriously. Have you had a chance to sort of confront them about this, with perhaps in less strong language, but have you had a chance to discuss this with them?
Thank you, Councillor. So I completely agree in terms of their lack of transparency is disappointing and worrying, as well as how they handled the whole piece in itself. I have spoken to them a couple of times, and also to other clients who were also unaware of the nature, the detail, if you like, of the breach. I have been very clear in terms of how I perceive that they should have dealt with the case, given the number of cases that were involved. So we were lucky, in inverted commas, that it was only 75 of our own members. Other funds had far greater numbers of data shared. I feel that they should have had an open meeting with all of their clients, giving full transparency and the detail, to give us all the opportunity to ask questions at the same time and hear the same information, which hasn't happened. I think as a fund, I've spoken to the chair separately. We need to outline, I'd like to do some work on a policy that we share with LPP, outlining our expectations of how we want them to respond and act if in the unfortunate event of such an event occurring again.
Thank you. That's a great idea. In the event that they were to be fined for this incident, which I understand probably won't happen, or any future incident, where LPPA would incur a fine from the ICO, are they likely to recoup that through fees paid to them by the member funds?
So we are the data owners, so we would also be liable here. So which is part of the reason behind. In fact, it should be our decision what happens, what action is taken, as opposed to them going away internally and doing what they feel is right and then choosing to tell us far after the event. So there's some real key outlining of having a strategy and a policy that we are very clear to them how we want them to respond and what the roles and responsibilities are. In terms of the fining, there's a limited liability in the contract that we have with them, and that's limited with it just over £1 million. Yeah. so that it is limited. I hope that answers your question.
It's really helpful, and I know that you haven't got the contract with you, and I'm not a contract lawyer, but have they breached the terms of our contract by not informing us of this in a timely and professional manner?
I don't believe that they've breached the contract. And the IC, they have reported the ICO. I've reported to the LBHF data protection officer as well, and have consulted with our pension fund lawyers. So it's really about lessons learned and putting something in place before the unlikely event of something happening again.
Thank you very much for that answer. And I don't know if that is possible, but perhaps it'd be a good idea for their visit next time around for them, rather than for us to say to them, we're upset, we're annoyed at you, maybe they should come with a 10 or so slides presentation outlining what steps they're going to take. And perhaps Eleanor in her presentation can say what, if that has been possible, steps or additional contractual or policy arrangements have been agreed between ourselves and the LPPA.
I would agree. Of the 3 actions that we've discussed, I think we've touched on a few of them. Is one, I think it's very positive that we've already requested that LPPA bring their cybersecurity expertise so that we're able to question and scrutinise them, get a bit more transparent detail on the nature of this breach and their lackadaisical response. Second is developing and deploying our own strategy, making it explicit our expectations of both their duties and ours. And then third, Eleanor, I always, as I say, very much value the relationships that you've built with other funds. I think where appropriate, it would be very positive for us to have a kind of united front where we're all giving a kind of consistent request for greater transparency and clarity on the work of LPPA on cybersecurity, because other funds face the same liabilities.
Absolutely agreed, Chair.
Any further questions, please, Anne and Peter?
Can I just confirm then, are they coming to our May meeting? Is that my understanding?
Yes, Councillor.
Is there anything else you want us to do in the meantime? Because obviously I remember sitting through a meeting here, I think it might have been the last one or the one before, when we were actually talking about cybersecurity. So I just wondered, obviously you're picking up, and I know you're concerned about it. Is there anything else we need to do between now and May? Because that is quite a long time.
So thank you, Councillor. I will be looking at outlining the roles and responsibilities going forward for any such instance. So I'll share that outside of the meeting pack so that it's included in the meeting pack. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just come back with another quick point? 'Cause it's separate. I noticed that your member satisfaction survey you mentioned wasn't that well responded to, and I think we all get those, don't we, from supermarkets and NHS. So, and sometimes it's a good thing that it says that between the lines that people are happy. But I just wondered, I think you mentioned this a few meetings ago. Is there another way of just taking soundings from members, maybe, dare I say, a focus group or something? Because I'm quite interested in I think the jargon is lived experience data. And I think there's an opportunity here, especially with the changes that are happening. And our members might not necessarily be au fait with that, and maybe they don't need to be. But I just wondered whether you might get something from a particular, a group that you might select, or self-select, to help us just get a bit of a notion about what the members are actually thinking about various issues at the moment. Thank you. Have you ever done that? I just wondered.
Thank you, Councillor. So from LPPA's side, they do have a focus group. It's a very small group. I think one of the pension board members has participated in that feedback group. Separately on our external internet site, I do have a section there which invites comments and feedback from members. But you're right, there's always more that we can do. Off the top of my head, something like asking for feedback for those that we know, ex-LBHF employees that are retiring, to actually just give us some, if they have the time, to give us some honest feedback on their experience and what could have gone better. So that's certainly something I can do going forward.
I'm just going to push you a bit on that. I think you could go a bit further, find a group that represent different sectors or whatever to come in and maybe to ask them some questions about their experience. I work part-time at university. It's quite a big thing at the moment about lived experience data, right, across policies. And I just thought this might be an opportunity to gather some slightly, a little bit more interesting information about how it's, what the policy is like there, how it actually works down here. And that's all I'm suggesting. So I would recommend you try and have a look at that, if you may. Thank you.
Councillor, appreciate the feedback. I am limited. I have a very small team. And so it is something that we certainly look to do in the future, but I want to manage your expectations in terms of capabilities to action something like that in the short term.
If there's nothing further, can I ask members to note the report?
Noted.
Lovely. So we are back to item 5, governance compliance statement, Ellen.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper sets out the revised governance compliance statement that has been updated to include both the role of the committee and pension board chair, as well as an updated view of the structure of the pension fund management. So I'm asking the pension fund committee to delegate the finalised, welcome any feedback, finalised and publishing of the document to myself prior to the next meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Eleanor. Again, I wanted to ask you about the vacancy of an employer representative. I noted that I think this is something we've talked about before. What's the situation on this?
Thank you, Chair. So we do ask periodically. So all of our fund employers send in monthly payment schedules and remittances, and we do ask periodically if any of them are interested in being a representative. But I think, given the time commitment, unfortunately, there is quite a reticence to actually engage there. We've had. I think last year we recruited the pension board. We had one employee that was interested and then pulled out. So we do keep trying, and hopefully, certainly with new fund employers, we have a better opportunity to get them to engage. So I am hopeful that we will sometime this year get a representative, but unfortunately it is not the most attractive role, it seems.
I'm sure that whoever gets to meet you and us will come running to this committee, but thank you.
Lovely. If there are no further questions or observations, can I ask if the committee will approve the draft governance compliance statement delegating to both Eleanor in consultation with myself to finalise and publish? Approved. Marvellous. Pressing on then, so to item 8, pension fund business plan outrun. Phil.
Thank you, Chair. So this report sets out the outturn for the pension fund business plan for the previous financial year, 23-24. It's a simplified business plan. We like to keep the thing vanilla and easy to understand as possible, which is basically trying to identify tasks and allocate responsibility for those tasks, and then report on successful completion of those tasks at the year end. And we also include a budget for the year. Page 98 sets out the outturn for the 23-24 budget. Members will notice there is variation in terms of the budget estimate and the outturn. And I do have some reasons for that. So in terms of the committee and the contract fees, costs of running the pension fund are shown. During 23-24, the admin costs did increase substantially, 764 against the budget of 468. This is largely as a result of an increase in the administration staff recharge, so there's more staff. pensions administration contract and project costs. So that's a reasonably substantial increase. In terms of the investment management fees, obviously there's reasonably substantial increases there. The total management cost for investment rose by 24% during the year. So the three main drivers of this, more favourable investment performance, so managers hitting their threshold for performance-related fees. Those fees calculated from a higher net asset value of the assets, so the assets have increased in value. So that does drive the increase in fees. And finally, we invested in 4 new areas and topped up specific investments in other areas in 23, 24. So these all combined together to increase that fee to a higher level, and also associated with higher transaction fees in terms of the associated costs of the moving into the investments themselves, so that the transaction costs would have increased too. If it's the wish of the members, and we've not provided a full analysis within the report, I can take it back and do a bit more digging and come up with some more specifics if there's particular areas in which you're unhappy about. So page 99 starts with the narrative in terms of the pension fund business outturn. And we've divided this into admin, communications, actuarial funding, the committee itself and the governance process, the local pension board, the management of risk, and provided a narrative on each part of those aspects for the business plan. I can answer any specific questions if necessary. And then for 24-25, you'll see the corresponding plan for the 24-25 year. So very happy to take any questions if there are any.
Phil, if I'm looking at the fees correctly, the one that really stood out was Allspring. Are they just very expensive relative to the Civ to Insight?
So for Allspring Global, we had a budget of 710 in comparison with the 251 outturn. Obviously, that was for a specific part of the financial year because we took them on during that particular period. I can go do some digging on that particular manager and provide some further analysis if you like.
Sorry, just to add, the actual fees for Allspring annual management charge are actually less than the LC by maintain fund. I haven't looked at the underlying, sorry, as in the percentage that they charge per annum. I haven't looked at the underlying data that Phil and the team have used here, but it might be that there are a lot more transaction costs in moving into the fund, but also there is a higher allocation to Allspring than the LCIV. So I think it's about double. So that will impact the cost as well.
Apologies, Mike. You were looking at the basis point charge and comparing that with the LCIV's product.
I was looking at the table, I think, on page 105 with the actual list of fees. So LCIV Global Bonds, that I think was the old PIMCO mandate, which we then split between Insight and Allspring. And so I don't know whether it covered a full year, but you had 171k for PIMCO. Maybe not, because maybe we disinvested partway through the year. But it looks like there's now about £1 million worth of fees across the Allspring and Insight mandates, which just looks a lot more than what we were paying before. Allspring's share of it is disproportionate to the Insight.
Okay, come back to you on that one.
Thank you, Joe. Actually, I wanted to follow up on that. So on page 98, we've got a table that tells us what the estimate for 2023, 2024 was, and what the outturn was, which is what we actually paid. In many cases, as you've explained for the fees, this goes up. In the case of Allspring, this goes down. So I was a bit puzzled as to why the table on 105 for the 2023 for estimate, actually, why isn't that the outturn instead? Because I feel like it's difficult to really understand the variations, and particularly then if Mike, as he's highlighted, we've paid 250 in 2023-4, but then now we're estimated 851 for 25-6. I'm kind of sort of asking myself where what's the numbers, and then equally that makes it look like there are some actual enormous jumps between 3-4 and 5-6. But also then equally, this makes me think, right, if we were so off the mark in 3-4, then these predictions in 4-5, some of them are below what we've actually paid in 3-4. Sorry, I'm using numbers very interchangeably, but yeah.
Yes, in the original estimate, we wouldn't normally include any outperformance bonus. So if in the contract there is a clause that says if the manager reaches a particular performance level, then the performance fee is payable. We would pay that if that particular barrier was achieved, but wouldn't normally include it in an estimate. I think the best thing I can do, where a performance bonus has been paid, make it clear what that performance figure is, isolate it from the overall fee, so split the two, and then show you how that has fed into the New Year's estimate. So I'm happy to do that analysis for you.
And then this is a completely wildcard question: are you able to guesstimate what the performance fee would be for the year coming?
That's a challenge. If a manager is to outperform, to be able to anticipate that's quite a challenge.
But then for Allspring, you are anticipating that they're going to do that because we want to pay them short of £1 million, don't we? Whereas for this year, we've paid them 250. So you're expecting them to do 3 times as good?
Yes, I think that part of that element of that is that we only took on Allspring partway during the year. So there's a pro rata charge involved there. But again, I can make that clear in further analysis for you.
Thank you, that is helpful. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Quick one from me. We seem to have done quite well on actuarial fees. What's behind those numbers coming in at sort of considerably less? And does that mean we can expect to be paying slightly more this time around?
Yes, the actuarial charge is quite a curious one, because we are certainly as a tri-borough shared service, we are benefiting from quite a serious cut in tender costs associated with the service, really as an ambition from Hymans to gain us as a client. So Hymans took the contract from Barnett Waddingham and priced accordingly. So I would say, in terms of what you see there, is the achievement of that saving. Obviously, in a actuarial valuation year, we would expect that figure to be higher because there'll be far more work involved. So for 25-26, you'll see that figure rise.
As a consultant myself, I enjoy seeing the practice.
If there are no further questions or observations, can I ask the committee to note the 2023-24 business plan outturn, please?
Noted.
Marvellous. Staying with you then, Phil, on the item 9, the responsible investment statement.
So thank you, Chair. This is the latest version of the responsible investment statement. To give the committee notice of future work practice, we will be engaging very closely with the London Civ this year as they start to take on responsibility for the tactical management of our assets, and obviously that includes future fund manager selection. So the committee itself will still produce its own statement, but we will be working with the CIV that will produce theirs, and theirs will reflect management of Hammersmith's assets, but see along with 31 other clients as well. So if there are any specifics on the statement, I'm very happy to answer those.
Sorry. Thank you very much for providing this. Just a quick comment on the accessibility of the document. There is, yeah, I mean, as sure as day follows night, of course I was going to comment on this. Some of the parts of the graphic design are not good from an accessibility point of view. So white text on yellow background, big no-no. So just to make sure before we publish this, because it's all about social benefits and all of that, that we make sure that actually everyone can read this. I had a bit of a devil's advocate kind of challenge to some of the things that are said on this report, such as on page 117, where it says that the neglect of corporate social responsibility and poor attention paid to environmental, social and governance issues is more likely to lead to poor or reduced shareholder returns. That's not always true though, isn't it? And then there was something on page 119. If an investment manager fails to adequately consider ESG issues, the committee is prepared to disinvest assets from that manager. Whilst I'm all for ESGs, wouldn't that not conflict with our duty to first and foremost ensure that our funds return so that we can pay our pensions?
So with regard to the first point, Chair, in terms of where a company has transgressed and maybe damaged the environment in order to save costs, obviously there's a benefit to the company. Those externalities at some point will have to be paid for. It's just a case of whether the authorities swiftly onto that transgressor and the timeline in which these issues are addressed. Officers are of the view that in the long term, if ESG principles are obeyed, then those share returns will be superior over that period of time. But we accept that occasionally there are things that happen where possibly corners are cut to save money, and that doesn't always work out for the best, in the best interest of the shareholders. Second question. Can you remind me? Sorry, Chair.
No, of course. So page 119, there is a statement that says, if an investment manager fails to adequately consider ESG issues, the committee is prepared to disinvest assets from that manager. If we were to say to you that we feel that one investment manager has failed to consider ESG, but that fund is making the returns that we need, what would you say to us?
Yes, I think it would depend on the nature of the transgression. If it was serious enough and damaging enough and involved to a sufficient level our reputation, then certainly we would take action. And
So,
these are reputational risks, I would say.
so where a reputational risk or actual damage would be caused, that would trump our duty to ensure returns. I'm not challenging the whole point. I'm 100% on board with the ESGs before anyone thinks otherwise, but I'm just trying to see how much is this sort of phrased and formulated in a way that we can actually do what we say.
I think we can see the larger picture, if you don't mind, Phil, that anything that impinges our reputation will then impinge the profitability and ability to seek return from some of our investments.
Let's say there's a very profitable tobacco company in one of the mixes in which we invest. That's reputational damage, but actually not necessarily means a bad performing fund.
I don't think that this is a.
If it were a tobacco company that produced a very damaging specific product, so some kind of tobacco gum, for example, that was condemned widely by the medical profession, but the tobacco company still chose to produce and market and distribute, then that's a good example of where, as officers, we would probably bring that to your attention and ask you if you wanted to be continued invested in that.
And that ultimately that temporary profit is an illusion. That exactly as Phil has described, eventually, whether it's today, tomorrow, or in years hence, regulators are going to come down on that product and demand recompense for its damage.
It's a fair point, but why I took tobacco is because the government introduced a continuation of the previous government, a tobacco and vapes bill, which will phase out tobacco in this country, raising the limit age for this. There will be no ban on investing in tobacco companies in Sweden that sell tobacco that you can chew. So that's what I'm very interested in. I want to kind of stress test this for when this comes. Is this robust enough for us to be able to say that our principle mean that where there is a fund that yields good returns, healthy returns, that a good part of our mix and sort of diversification strategy, we're able to say they conflict with our ESG, we can divest.
As I say, I don't see these as competing or conflicting interests. I think I'm going to draw this one to a close. That I think this statement is very, very consistent in our work, which is that to extract the maximum value and return for our investments, ESG considerations must be reviewed and must be considered as part of our investments. Pressing on, are there any further questions on this point? Okay, can I ask that members approve the responsible investment statement for 2025 for publication? If any changes are requested, delegate approval to Phil in consultation with myself. Perfect. Okay, pressing on then, Phil, if you don't mind taking us through the open elements of item 10, Alpha Real Capital ILIF top-up option.
Thank you, Chair. So this is one particular investment manager within the asset portfolio. This is Alpha Real Capital that the fund put money into a few years back in May 21. So 31st of December, the fund's investment in that asset class is around 78 million. It's 5.5% of assets, where the policy of the asset allocation is 7.5, so it is underweighted at the moment, and we do have the opportunity to invest in the fund via the purchase of secondary units. In terms of the exempt appendix, so Izio has kindly provided a breakdown and analysis of the fund's performance, or this particular asset class, its overall performance. It has underperformed in terms of its benchmark, but not in terms of the fund manager in comparison with other fund managers. It's the specific asset allocation in terms of the benchmark performance. So we're not concerned at the performance of the fund manager in comparison with the fund manager's peers in that particular area. So I think if I'm to go further in terms of the report, I would need to refer to the exempt appendix, which we'd have to move into exempt territory.
Any questions on the open elements of this? We will return to it momentarily.
Yes, I just want to ask a question. I think you said it's 5.5% of our assets, 30 million extra. I'm just going to ask this question that I picked up recently. Is it within our target range for local investment? I mean, I think it's UK commercial ground rents. Is that right? So does that fit in? Because that's a question we have to ask ourselves. Whether we follow that is another matter. But it sounds to me as though that's local investment. Is it? This is Alpha mainly local investments, not local, but maybe in the UK. Is that right?
It is 100% UK, so
100%.
yeah.
Right. Okay. Because thank you very much. That I thought that was the case, but it's because we have to set a target range for local investment as a proportion of the fund. That's what I've been told. So.
So, do you mind then pressing on to item 11 and introducing the open elements of the pension fund quarterly update, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is the standard investment performance quarterly update. So for quarter four of 2024 up to 31st of December. The overall performance of the fund is set out on page 133, and then we've got the scorecards on page 135 for the quarterly monitoring report, and then from page 137 onwards, ISIO provided their usual analysis of the fund manager performance. So very happy for myself and Johnny to take any questions.
Thank you, Chair. There is a big point about staff changes at London Civ. This has been an ongoing discussion in this committee. I remember, I think, sort of the CIO and CEOs kind of exiting at the same time. Obviously, there were a variety of reasons which you were very good to explain to us. I don't remember if it was exempt or not, so I'm not going into details. But that's still marked as a risk and still an area of concern. So have things stabilised at London Civ?
So where London Civ have progressed in recent weeks, they do have a new chief investment officer now. So that's Jenny Buck, and she's been hired. She's moved from the Tesco pension fund. Vast experience, quite a long career with good record, and seen as quite a coup for the London Civ to bring her on board. Fingers crossed, because obviously we're very optimistic at the last previous appointment, which didn't last too long. So there's been a bit of flux. I'm happy to take both Johnny's and Sam's opinion on where we are with the CIF, but I'm reasonably optimistic. We're still under the chief exec officer of Dean Bowden, and he's made a particular mark in bringing the team together, and a good communicator, and has brought the 32 boroughs closer in terms of the CIV's governance. And we've seen quite a difference in the way that the CIV is run. Also in recent weeks or months, we have Andrew Myers. So his title is the Chief Propositions Officer. It's a curious title, but he looks at the possibilities for different asset classes, and he'll be particularly responsible for the next year of transitioning the remainder of the assets as we move up to 100% of transition assets to the pool by 31st of March 26. And then even further, Tim Mapufu, who you recognise the name, he was the pension fund manager for Hammersmith and Fulham some years back. He then went to London Borough of Haringey. He's just qualified as a chartered financial analyst, as a charter holder, and he's just been taken on to the CIV as one of the main managers, again, working to transition assets across from the funds where there's assets outstanding. So again, as I say, I'll be interested to hear Sam and Johnny, but my overall view is that we're in a good place at the moment with the CIV.
Thanks, Phil. Obviously, an awful lot going on, a lot of change. Personally, I'm reassured that there seems to be a bit of a return to staffing the CIV with people who understand the LGPS, as opposed to purely looking at people who are investment people. I think there's some positives there, not solely people who are from the LGPS, because I think that also, you need a balance, but I would personally take some reassurance that at a time when there's a lot of change being sort of thrown in from the external central government side, that there are people within the Civ who sort of understand the pressures from both sides of it. So personally, I think they're in a good place. But of course, making sure the oversight and reporting and governance and engagement is right for us is going to be the most important thing, because this is going to be some crucial months and quarters of development of their offering in order to meet the new requirements that we're going to have of them. And the only way, I mean, the way for us to really get the most out of that is to be engaging in the right way, to tell them what we need and how we want to work with them. And given you're a pool of 30 plus voices, you know, we don't want to be at a point where it's just who's shouting loudest gets what they want. So it's all about engagement. So yeah, I would echo some of Phil's thoughts there in terms of the individuals coming in. I think there's one more actually who's come from one of the Sussexes, isn't there? Sean, East Sussex. So
East
again,
Sussex, yeah.
good understanding of the LGPS and what's going on. I think that's very positive. That doesn't, I mean, that's sort of completely aside from investment performance, because that's sort of slightly out of their hands. But getting the operating model right will then allow engagement with the managers in the right way, evolution of the offering in the right way to meet our needs, etc., etc. So yeah, generally I would say optimistic, but cautiously so.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Phil. Yeah, I won't dwell too much on this or add too much further, but from an ISIO viewpoint, I think the key point is a very pivotal time for the London CIV as they progress to the new norm, I guess, if that's what you want to call it, and all the news coming out of LSIV, especially from the personnel point of view, is positive. I think with the recent departure of the previous CIO, what we haven't always seen in the past is the London CIV moving quick to get a replacement in, but that's the opposite this time around, very quick movements. And as these guys have suggested, a lot more personnel with very focused roles. So positive outlook, but still, again, cautionary. And there are a lot of moving parts going forward. So there are a lot of points that do need to be monitored and see how things do progress. But that's what we do as part of our monitoring. We receive regular updates from the London CIV. So I guess let's see how things go.
Very helpful assessments. Thank you, Phil, Sam, and Johnny.
Thanks very much. Two issues, I guess, which are fairly big in the DB world are the changes to the PPF levy and also discussions going on about the use of DB surpluses. And I was wondering, it's kind of a two-part question. First is, does the PPF potential changes have any material impact to our performance? And the second is, what, if any, conversations are going on about DB surplus?
So I guess in the wider private pension scheme world, there are a lot of impacts. There are a lot of things going on, but for LGPS, limited impact, I would say, especially on those points.
I would point out Kensington and Chelsea a month ago set itself an employer rate of 0% for next year against the advice of the actuary, where we know this is now being actively considered by government and the regulator, but we've not heard anything adverse to that decision. So we were concerned that maybe that would set a precedent which would result in a lot of other LGPS funds running for that same door to get through before you really, if you're going to go down that route, you have to get through the approval by 31st of March. But we're not aware of any such action taken. So it's possible. It's a good strategy by the borough, given that it will return around £18 million to their council budget and have reasonably little, well, practically zero impact on their funding level, given that they're probably about 215% funded.
Chair, I'm just wondering there should be any concern about the investment in Darwin alternatives. It appears at page 158 of the bundle. I note that the return was the underperforming its target by 36.6% last year. And as far as I'm aware, it's a fund which is in which this power has been locked in until 2030, I believe. I'm just concerned whether we should be concerned about the underperformance, the fact that it is 36.6%, the fact that the fund was invested in January 2022, when there was Brexit, when we had a COVID situation, and there was an active encouragement in this country for staycation. So I would have thought if people were going to use holiday lodges, they would use it during staycation, as opposed to other times when you can go to Spain on a cheap holiday. I think it's a fund which needs to be looked at, and especially in view of the fact that I believe that it's locked in. We're locked in for a set number of years ahead, so we can't even make an exit if we need to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. We do actually provide a bit more of a detailed paper in the private appendix for this one, so I don't know if we want to touch on the question later, but to summarise, the reason for the large drop-off over the last year is that there was a 25% write-down to the NAV over Q3 2024. I can provide a lot more detail in the private appendix, but in terms of that lock-in period, the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham is locked in until 2031. So in terms of options, if the committee wanted to consider exiting, there's no option on the primary market. Within the secondary market, we have been in touch with Darwin and as part of our connections looking into the wider market, but there's no active secondary market at the minute, so limited options. If there was a real push to disinvest, there could be a much more active search, but any disinvestment or redemption would take place at a material haircut on top of what has already been lost. And I guess as well as that, disinvesting now would be essentially crystallizing the losses that have taken place. So it's not always the case that you want to kind of sit and wait for things to, I don't know, to improve, but it feels at the minute the best option to do is to closely monitor, to really challenge the manager and make sure they are looking at ways to improve, looking at how they can progress going forward, but also monitor the secondary markets as well to see if there are any opportunities there.
Chair, can I just explore with Johnny in terms of the reasons, and Mike will be aware, because Mike and myself have met with Darwin on a number of occasions. The reason for this write-down of net asset value is to do with the discount rate and the instruction from their auditor as to increasing the discount rate, which has obviously resulted in a write-down of value. So it's not to do with the any reduction in revenues or profitability of the firm. It's the valuation of those assets in the balance sheet. So just to clarify that with you, that's 100% of the reason.
That's broadly correct. So we have, after the last meeting, we went away, we tried to get a lot more detail from Darwin, and they've said that about 30% of the fall can be attributed to essentially increased development and building costs. So going into the assets that are still under development. So that is, I'm going a long way around this, but the projected costs to develop those assets has increased. So in terms of projected revenue, that has been reduced, but the remaining 70% is less to do with current revenue, but more around revenue expectations and I guess where yields currently are at within the fund. So On your point, revenue hasn't fallen as of recently, but they don't expect yields to increase, i.e. what customers would be willing to pay to stay. They don't expect that to increase as quickly as they previously expected.
Chair, just to come on that, I think one of the queries I had last time was around the discount rate. Not to be too technical, but from memory, it was around base rate, whereas I think intuitively you might have expected it to be more around gilts, which would be closer aligned with the long-term nature of their cash flows. So I think we had a question to you as to why they were base rates, and therefore, as base rates have fallen quite a bit over the last 6 months, whether that is or will feed through into the valuation. And another idea I had when I was thinking about this was that if they were to maybe sell one or two of their assets, if they achieved a value for those assets which was significantly above the current book value, depressed book value, then it would provide an argument to revalue the whole portfolio. So to what extent are they considering maybe selling an asset or two to establish that there is a lot of value there?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll maybe start on the second point. So they have they have 8 current operational assets and 3 that are under construction. 2 of those they are actively looking to sell. So if they do, and they are quite confident that they will be able to achieve an amount that will fully recover the cost that has been spent, and I guess using their words, ideally profitable. So in that sense, yes, that would be positive if they are able to sell 2 out of 3. If they sold all 3, then maybe that would be different. But I don't think they are actively looking at that third asset at present. On the base rate perspective, they've been within the discount rate. Darwin haven't provided that much granular information as to why the base rate is included and not government bond yield within the it was the weighted average cost of capital that they use. But what they have come out with a bit more detail is that the movement in interest rates hasn't impacted this 25% reduction in NAV over Q3, but there was a 15% fall in, I think it was Q2 or Q3 2023, which was primarily attributed to heightened interest rates and how this would be expected to impact cost there. So the view from that back then, from that perspective, was that when the base rate, or when the base rate does come back down, you'd expect to see some profitability, some improved.
Well, the base rate has started coming down. I think that this markdown happened when base rates were at 5.25 and they're now at 4.50. So if what they're saying is correct, then we ought to be seeing some. It depends, I guess, how often they rerun the calculation, but it would be in their own interests, I would guess, to get some confidence back. They can't have it both ways. If they're arguing that the increase in base rates was a main factor in the negative down valuation, then they should be getting some upside with base rates falling. To the point where you mentioned earlier about selling an asset and hopefully it being profitable, well, yeah, one wouldn't expect they'd sell an asset at a loss. So it would have to make sense. It would only make sense if they're selling it above the book value.
Chair, could I suggest we get the Darwin in next time and get them to do a presentation on where we are?
I think that'd be enormously helpful. Can I suggest then that we press on to exempt discussion? Do the members agree to exclude members